technical lead. So that's a mouthful at the University of Georgia, Birmingham. So let's welcome our speakers today.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I'm a low talker, and I will try to stay by the microphone. I just wanted to give you a bit of background about me. I am not a librarian. I am also not a techie. I don't write code. I don't understand it. But I appreciate all the fruits of everyone's labor. So without any further ado, I want to start our presentation. So just a brief agenda for this session. I'm going to give you a brief background on digital science, talk a little bit about what Dimensions is, why we decided to create it, and then it's really Bob and Ralph's show. So I'm really happy that they are joining me. So digital science is a portfolio of companies. You might recognize some of these logos, including Overleaf, Figshare, Symplectic, Altmetric, ReadCube. Basically, digital science is kind of an umbrella company. We invest in, support, and nurture small companies that provide solutions to problems in the research life cycle. Most of our founders come from an academic background, and they started their companies because they perceived a problem that they wanted to solve. We started in 2009, so we're relatively young. But for over 12 companies, we have only about 300 people, including all of our developers and staff. So what we decided to do at Digital Science is 6 of these companies, Altmetric, Uber Research, ReadCube, the Digital Science Consultancy, Symplectic, and Figshare, we decided to create a new resource. So what is Dimensions? This resource is basically, I'm supposed to say it's a linked knowledge research system. It's a database. It's a very fancy word for a linked database, which contains publications, awarded grant information, patents, and clinical trials. The publication portion of Dimensions is also available free to researchers, and that was something really important to us as we developed this. We try to have a free offering of most of our products. For example, the Altmetric badges, Dimensions badges are available free for institutions to use. We wanted to have publications and their citation data available free for researchers as well, because as we all know, it tends to be very expensive information to obtain. So just a little overview of the data that's in Dimensions right now. We have over 90 million publications in our publication database. We have taken this from multiple sources and we continue to grow this database. Our most recent addition is SSRN publications. This includes journal articles, preprints, conference proceedings, books, and book chapters. And we also plan on adding a lot more preprint services down the line. And we work with the Initiative for Open Citations. Again, it's very important to us that we make citation data freely available, not least for the researchers to have the citation data, but because we want the community to be able to develop additional metrics based on this free information. The grant data, and I see my little trophy icon has moved. The grant data actually started with Uber Research. So Uber Research used to be a database primarily of grant data. My background is actually, before I came to digital science, I worked at a funding agency that used the old Dimensions, as we call it, basically to find out what the landscape of grants was. So we decided to build on this. We now have 37 million grants from, I think it's now close to 300 funders globally. We get this information 3 ways. One is we have a direct relationship with the funder, as was the case where I used to work. We get data that's available via APIs, and we crawl websites for grant data. And you can see a partial list of funders on the screen. The patent data in Dimensions comes from one of our portfolio companies, IFI Claims. We have the agencies that you see on the screen. The next up, we will be including patent information from China and Russia. Our clinical trial data, again, is pretty global. We're always going to be continuously adding to this database, but this is where we started. And the defining feature in Dimensions, and this is what I'm kind of here to talk about, and it's great to follow Soren in that fantastic presentation, which again, now I want to redo my whole spiel here. So we wanted to link these content sources. So if you look at a publication record in Dimensions, where possible, we have included all the publication references, so you can link out to those documents, publication citations, so you can link out to those. Where we can identify the grant that supported this publication, we link to that record. Likewise for patents and clinical trials. So you can see this applies across all the content types. Now, it's not perfect. For example, you'll see funder acknowledgments in a publication that'll say, we'd like to thank the Wellcome Trust for their generous contribution to our research, but it won't cite a specific grant. So in those cases, we can't link to a specific grant, but we can acknowledge that the Wellcome Trust was one of the funders of that research. So this is a little picture, whoops, of all of the links and Dimensions back and forth. You'll see the pink hexagon. Is that a hexagon? Yes. Is policy papers. They're going to be added in 30 to 60 days from now, and that's working with Altmetric to discover those links. So why did we decide to build this database? Well, basically, there were multiple reasons. The first, as I touched on before, is that citation metrics are often behind very expensive paywalls. And research discovery, relatedly, is also often paved with obstacles. You'll see in Dimensions, even the free version, we have an open access filter, so you can limit the publications to open access articles. And where possible, we've also provided one-click access to a PDF. The third reason, and this was one of the major ones, is that all of this data, the clinical trial data, the patent data, this all exists in different places, but pulling them together requires a lot of manual effort. And then likewise, piecing together the entire life cycle of research is kind of a huge undertaking. So we wanted to make this a lot easier for everybody involved. And this is the picture that we hope to kind of help illuminate. So, you know, when you just look at publications and their citations, you're looking at a very narrow window of the research life cycle. So we wanted to capture this from as early as possible to as late as possible. So if you're looking at grant data, you're able to look at what's going to be funded in the future. So we have awarded grants in there that aren't active until maybe 2 or 3 years from now, that are active for 5 years after that. So if you're looking to get an idea of what the landscape looks like in 5 years, now you can. Then when you perform the research, you generate data sets, you present it at conferences. We wanted to reflect that via conference proceedings. We're going to be linking out to data sets in the future. Then you have the actual publication, and then at the time of publication, you have social media attention, you have news coverage, basically any kind of online engagement with that research. We wanted to pick that up. Then we have traditional citations. Then after that, depending on the field, you might have a clinical trial that's related to the research, a patent that comes out of it, or a policy document that cites the research. So this entire life cycle we wanted to kind of bring to light, and we also wanted to make it very easy to navigate. So to do this, we looked at what we had available within digital science. So we used data, again, from Uber Research, as I mentioned, Altmetric, Symplectic, IFI Claims, Figshare, ReadCube, and Grid. And Grid, if you want to access it, it's grid.ac. It's a public disambiguation database for institutions. So that's how we've used that database to disambiguate institutions within the database. And I'm going to come back to this slide because what do you notice about these silos other than the fact that I put some lame effect on top of the photo? They all look the same, right? So the difference with us is, with the data that we're looking at, is patent data doesn't look like clinical trial data. It doesn't look like grant data or publication data. So how do we make this, how do we make it so that you can navigate all of these different content types? So this is what this was the major undertaking of this system. We took all of this different data. We identified the institutions again using Grid to help disambiguate them. We categorized things at a record level. So instead of categorizing an entire journal, for example, as belonging to one field of research, we've categorized each article according to different fields of research. We've tried to extract concepts. Again, this is something that harkens back to what we heard this morning. We've used multiple methods, including ORCID, with which Dimensions is integrated to disambiguate researchers. So even in the free version of Dimensions, you can go in now, create an account, connect to your ORCID ID, and you can claim publications while you're in the interface. So all of this gives us at the end results of this enriched metadata that enables you to navigate between content types based on field of research, based on institution, based on researcher. And another very important principle for digital science is that we did not want to do this by ourselves. This was not just a strictly commercial undertaking. One of the values of the company and one of the reasons that I joined is that they're very concerned with and responsive to the community's needs. So to do that, to accomplish all of this and come up with a product that was really responsive to everyone's needs, we enlisted over 100 global partners to work on Dimensions. These included funding agencies like the NIH, universities, research institutions that are separate from universities. And this leads me to our first speaker from the University of Georgia, who is Bob Scott, who's going to tell you a little bit more about their participation, and we are very grateful for it. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me figure out how to get my PowerPoint going. That's okay. I would have done the same thing for you. Yeah, here we are. Happy to be here. I'm sort of a fish out of water. I'm from the research side. I spent 9 years as Associate Vice President for Research at UGA. And one of the things I spent much of that time doing is trying to understand data about research, grant funding data, research outputs, and things like that, and attempt to integrate it all and use it to create knowledge to make decisions. So that's basically what I want to talk to you about, and it's going to come across as sort of a use case for this new tool that Heidi just described, Dimensions. Which one is, oh. Sorry, a little lag on the slide change there. Let me say a little bit first about UGA. Many of you probably know UGA. We're a large, comprehensive research university. Some numbers there to give you a feeling for that. We're the flagship of the University System of Georgia. We're both a land grant and a sea grant institution, and so we have a very broad spectrum of research going on at UGA. While I was in the Office of Research, we implemented an electronic research administration system, which gave us essentially all the data we ever need to report on research activity at UGA. And we also implemented probably one of the most broad-based symplectic elements installations that covers everybody at the university. We launched it across the institution at the same time. And that tries to integrate research outputs like publications and presentations and other things like that with the grant data that comes from the Office of Research. And so we've been making strides in integrating those data with each other. That takes care of what happens at UGA. But obviously one of the things we want to do is ask, how are we doing compared to other institutions, our peer institutions? And so to do that, we need some sort of research analytics tools, and that's where Dimensions fits in. It's a natural fit with the rest of our data ecosystem in the UGA. I'm one of the people on the Dimensions Development Partner Program that Heidi mentioned. I've had a long relationship with digital science, and that experience on the partner program has been just terrific. I mean, the team is always open to suggestions from the community. Dimensions is a better product because of that, and it is still evolving. It is still improving and will for some time. The partner program is still ongoing. So let me step back and then suggest a particular use case. So these are the sorts of questions that come up in research offices all the time. And I've stated it here as, in what areas is the UGA research enterprise competitive compared to our peer institutions? Okay. So here's the way I would imagine going about this, and I'm going to sort of walk you through the use of dimensions to answer these questions. First, we need to identify what are the strong research areas at UGA from some sort of objective viewpoint. Then we're going to ask, okay, in those areas, how do we compare with our what we call our aspirational peers? I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. And then we want to drill down in that data and find the people at UGA who are the stars and the people at other research institutions that we might be interested in partnering with. Dimensions allows you to do all that. I considered actually doing a live demo with dimensions here, but decided that screenshots were as close as I'm going to get. But Ralph, after me, is going to give you a live demo, so you'll see the tool in action. He's a brave person. This is what the front screen of dimensions look like, essentially. And you can see up at the top, I have selected publications, but each of the data sets are available here for any query, any filter that you want to place on them. So one of the first things I had to decide for this question I'm trying to answer, where are our strengths at UGA, is how much data, over what number of years should I look at data? And I decided the last 5 years is probably a good reflection of what's going on today. So that's what I chose. And then I picked the University of Georgia. And I have to say, the nice thing about the usability dimensions, every time you create a filter, it all appears at the top of the page all the time. So you're always reminded of what you're searching for, what your query was. And once you do that, you can look at this on the right-hand side under analytical views. It starts to tell you what are the fields of research. So this is a taxonomy, one of the taxonomies that Dimensions uses to try and categorize what research areas are important here. And these are ordered by, in this case, number of publications. You can expand that and look in detail at what the categories where UGA publishes the most in the last 5 years. That's the way this is ordered now, but you can ask the question in many different ways. I'm just doing this as one example. And so you see, for example, that we're strong in genetics. Well, we knew that already. We're also strong in public health and health sciences. That's sort of a recent effort at UGA. And then you can see there's a bunch of other. So these are the disciplines that we're going to use to try and compare now with aspirational peers. You can also look at an overview and see a trend line for UGA for a particular discipline. And I just picked genetics for this one. And to be clear, I only picked from 2013 on. So you really should just be looking at those top 5 data points here for the trend. And genetics has been around for a long time at UGA. It's been a strong department for a long time. And so you see it's a pretty flat curve in terms of number of publications. If you look at public health and health sciences, it's a slightly different picture. It's increasing significantly over the past 5 years. So that's a good feeling for how you're trending in a particular research area. You can also drill down and look at the researchers in a particular area. So this is, again, public health and health sciences. Here are the stars in that area. So we can drill down even further, look at their publications, look at grants, clinical trials, patents. And I won't bother you with that. You can do the same thing by choosing the grants data source rather than the publications data source, and that's what this is. And again, you see similar fields of interest that are strong in terms of the amount of grant money coming in for that field. Okay, now we want to take that information we have about the University of Georgia and ask how do we compare with our peers in these particular areas, our areas of strength. Turns out in the university system of Georgia, every university has an approved list of peer institutions to use for these comparisons. So when we do that, we're always looking at apples versus apples. This is what's called our aspirational peer institutions. We also have a set of comparator peer institutions that are meant to look a lot like UGA. These are the people we'd like to be. That's the concept anyway. Obviously that depends on discipline. So I've picked disciplines where we're particularly strong and we're going to compare with our aspirational peers. So I simply add all of them to the query, include the University of Georgia as well. And now we're going to look at that portfolio of data and try and look at what disciplines are strong there and compare across those institutions. So you can pick research organizations in this analytical view and start to look at how the institutions rank with respect to number of publications or amount of money or any other parameter you choose. And so you can see that in this particular discipline, this turns out to be medical microbiology. That's an FOR discipline. We tend to refer to it as infectious disease research. Georgia actually ranks second in this list of institutions in that particular area. So we already recognize that we do pretty well in this area. But you can also look at what's called the heat map, which looks like this, which you probably cannot read. But it's basically the data that are in each of the cells on this map are a number of publications again, but you could pick another parameter for that. And then it compares down the side a bunch of FOR disciplines, and starting with public health, for example, et cetera. And across the top are all of our aspirational peer institutions, and the last one is the University of Georgia. And so this gives you a feeling for, just glancing at it, how competitive UGA is with aspirational peers in each of these areas. So I've highlighted a few where we're actually well within the range of the aspirational peer institutions. You can also look at this in terms of trend lines. So here are the trends of publications again for the top 5 research institutions in this particular area. And you can get a feeling for, are we in the ballpark here? Are we competing? Are we increasing our output or are we decreasing our output? Those sorts of questions. So if you do that generally, with respect to, I just picked top 10 fields of research where UGA is performing well. And what I'm plotting here is sort of an inverse number. This is the number of institutions in the aspirational peer group that are ranked lower than UGA in each of these disciplines. And so the taller bars are UGA is doing better. And the darker gray is for numbers of publications, and the lighter gray is for grant money. Okay, so you can see that we're actually doing pretty well in terms of comparisons with our aspirational peer institutions in several of these disciplines. And then there are other areas where we haven't really cracked that group yet. So psychology and public health and health sciences are actually, we're not comparable to our aspirational peers yet. So it gives you a feeling of the research landscape of the university compared to peer performance. Now, this is just counting publications or counting grant money. Maybe those are not the right metrics you want to use. You can actually pick many other ones. And for example, here what I have done is indicate the relative citation ratio in each of those disciplines for UGA. Anything bigger than 1 for the RCR is good, above average. And you can see that in medical microbiology, for example, that's a pretty strong relative citation ratio across all the researchers at UGA in that discipline. And again, as Heidi mentioned, these disciplines are assigned publication by publication and grant by grant. It's not a journal level ranking. Then we might want to use the data that we collected and drill down and identify who are the people who are driving this particular area of research at UGA. And here's an example of that in the field of medical microbiology, or as I mentioned, infectious disease research. And you can look, for example, at what are considered sort of impact metrics of the publications of these people by looking at field-weighted citation ratio or the relative citation ratio. And if you look down here, Boris Strepen sort of stands out in terms of impact of his work. So this is useful, objective information about the performance of researchers at our university. You can do the same thing with all the stars at the aspirational peer institutions. So that tends to be very useful information. So that just gives you a flavor for how we would use dimensions to answer these sorts of questions and where we would head from here. I've given you some examples. We might want to identify potential partners at other institutions for grant opportunities. We might want to nominate our stars for major research awards. We might want to, as I said, identify faculty at other institutions which we might want to recruit for a faculty position. Or consider resource allocation decisions. How do we allocate resources to centers of excellence that we know are doing well and can still do better? And, of course, develop communication strategies around our best research areas. So that gives you a feeling for how UGA is starting to use dimensions, and there are many other use cases that could have been presented here, and I personally am looking forward to seeing what dimensions becomes. Thanks.
So hopefully my living dangerously won't be too dangerous here. As soon as I find the mouse pointer. Very good. Okay. So first, just a little bit about UAB. We are a comprehensive urban university. We are the only public four-year degree university in the metropolitan area of Birmingham. And we are the largest research institution in the state of Alabama. And just a little plug of me, I am Ralph O'Flynn. I am the technical lead for the UAB profiles and the scholars at UAB systems. You'll find out a lot more about those systems as I start stepping through this presentation. I have been at UAB since 2014. Before that, I actually spent 8 years at EBSCO, putting data into data sources, and now I'm on the other side of looking at the data that we get. I am a development partner with Digital Science, and I work with the Vivo community as well. I am the task force lead for our new linking of Vivo's initiative, and also the theming and UI. And I am a member of the ontology task force, where I am pushing the inclusion of new humanities based ontologies into Vivo. So hopefully we'll see some of that very, very soon. Now, the question I get a lot is, how did we start down this path? How did we get to where we care about dimensions or any of these other products? Well, simply put, we had to. We were told. As part of our accreditation process, they came back and told us, you need a institution-wide research and information system. So we said, okay, if that's a requirement, we'll go do that. We spent about a year looking at different products, and we ended up with symplectic elements as our starting point. Before that, we had really just for research information, we had our grant system with InfoEd, and that was about it, except for a couple of in-house applications and scattered Excel files and Word documents, access databases, and whatever somebody hacked together in a school somewhere, usually on a server that's sitting under somebody's desk. So we asked, well, what do we need? I do want to show you some of the profiles that showed up before we started looking at this. I don't remember why this doesn't work now. I didn't turn it on. So we had started off looking at, I know you can't see my pointer unfortunately, but over here on the one closest to me in the background there, that actually was in production a few weeks ago. So text-based gray background circa 1994, probably tech there. Then we had something maybe around year 2000, and then we got closer to this year. But it was different from every part of the campus. So everybody had a different profile. Everybody had a different way of looking at their own data, even publicly. So we wanted to make a cohesive system. So after that, we started looking at how do we start? Well, we thought we'd start small. We'll create some faculty profiles. We'll build some reports and we'll train the faculty how to get into the system and use it, right? Sounds simple enough. I'm going to stand up one system, tell everybody go use it, and everything's going to be great, right? Yeah, that didn't work out too well. We found out very quickly just because you build it, they're not going to come. This isn't Field of Dreams. So we started looking at what do we need to do to get them on board. We found that, simple things like looking at linking fundings. So we had that message there at the bottom. It says you have 138 publications to link to some funding. Well, faculty weren't clicking on that. They weren't doing any linking. We had their publications that we had downloaded from Elements. We had their grant information, but we didn't have any way to link them together unless they told us. So nothing there. So we started looking at all the different products that we could use. Our core started out with Elements in the background, with InfoEd there at the bottom, and Vivo. So the Vivo is our public-facing side, and while Elements is our back-end research information system, it houses pretty much everything. So we have grants, we have teaching activities, professional activities, we have all their publications. We've converted what little systems that we had mostly into it. We run our course information from other systems into Elements as well. And then everything funnels out through into Vivo, well, a subset, the public-sided subset of that information. Then we started integrating other things into this. So we started looking at altmetric. Let's add the altmetric badges out there. Let's look at ReadCube. How can we add that to our public-facing side? So not only the faculty could use it, but other people could use it out there in the community. We encouraged ORCID. In fact, for graduate faculty, it's now a requirement. You must do it. As new pre- and postdocs come on board, it's also now a requirement for them. So they must sign up. We don't have an institutional ORCID, and I know they even got rid of that, but everybody is encouraged to go sign up for ORCID, and then we are actually going to include all of those people into our Elements system. So then dimensions came. And I will show you a lot more about that in just a moment. So it's time for that live demo. We'll cross our fingers here. Uh-oh. Can't see the page. All right, well, yes. So this is our Vivo site, Scholars at UAB. If you're familiar with Vivo, you're probably saying that's not what Vivo looks like. That's because as part of the task force that I've been working on with theming and UI, I created what's called the Vivo Bootstrap template. So I've turned Vivo basically into a responsive website with all the goodies that come along with being mobile ready. So see all the information you see, all the information you normally see on a Vivo site, but it's all there. Instead of searching, I'll just flip over to this tab here. Midge here is the person she's real life, and we use her as an example for pretty much everything. She's good with it, so we and happy to be our demo person. What we started doing was we took some of the free offerings that digital science has and started including those into our template here. So now we have the altmetric badges included along with our publications right there on our site. If they have if they're available for looking at Enriched, we also show that information right here on the screen. If I go into one, and just assume I clicked to that one right there, we start seeing a little more information about it, but now we see the dimensions badge. So we've added the dimensions part into this as well. Part of getting people to buy in, understand what dimensions is, what we need this information for, we put it as part of information we already currently have, so the faculty can see it, they can start understanding it, and get into, well, why is that there? Let's click on it, let's get more information, and then we give them additional training. So in this case, I'm going to click over, and now I'm on the badge page of dimensions. This one here is going to give you some metrics. Shows your citations, recent citations, your field citation ratio, and your RCR. But you don't have to stop there. When you click over here into the View More, you get this screen. Let's see. I'm going to click on. Yes, there we go. And see, Wi-Fi did work. So you get onto this screen here, and you can start looking at the publication references that you have for that, and you start seeing what the supporting grants were. All that linking, all that information that we didn't have before that we wanted. Well, now it's here if I click on that information in the badge. And also see the publication citations, and even that there's 2 linked clinical trials on this one here. All information that we wanted but never would have been able to get, and quite frankly, a lot of times the researchers don't even realize this information. So even if we went to them and they were diligent in entering all their information, they probably didn't know that somebody over here took this and ran with it. So this gives not only the administration who wants to run analytics and look at things like that, it gives the actual researcher and the faculty members information themselves that they can work with. Maybe they find a partner just by looking at their own research through the Dimensions application. Going from there, once you start looking at that, well, then you end up in the main part of the UI, the real live part here. So I went ahead and ran, just looked at publications for 2018 to 2015, just for UAB. And, let's see, field of research here, I see that one's at the very top, public health and health services. But I can also go and flip over. That was publications. Well, let's go take a look at grants. All right. So now I'm going to look at the analytical view there. Clinical sciences came to the top for grants, with public health and health services coming in second in the list for a number of grants. And then we have an overview, just for those years, of course, looking at the funders. So you start getting interest as people start looking through the data and really discovering what you can do with the data. More than likely, you won't think of all the use cases ahead of time. You'll think of them as you're starting to work through the data. Like, for example, Dimensions is not a funding source, a way to find funding sources. But, like Spin or something like that. But you can go and start looking at who the funders are for things that you're interested in that have been funded. Find out people that maybe aren't in your opportunity database. Found that's a good possibility. Find those things, edge cases that maybe you didn't think about. Or possibilities where you've submitted grant proposals, they were rejected multiple times. You go out and look at what did get accepted. Maybe what you're writing, the way you're writing it, is the defining factor here. Finding somebody to collaborate with on that information. A lot of times funders will give you your money, basically, if you have a collaborator they're already familiar with. So those are all things that you can start looking through with this that you can't do in your in-house system that you can do here in Dimensions. Then, for our very technical people here, I have another set of information. Dimensions has an API. So you don't have to just look at it through the front end and with all the pretty pictures. You can look at the raw data. You could run queries. So if you're familiar with Python, or if your web developers are familiar with Python, and most of them are, you can go out and start running a simple query and start bringing back information. Search publications, return publications. Don't return the whole of them. That would be bad. It will page you through eventually. But you start to see what kind of information you might bring back. The title, the IDs, the authors, all that kind of information, all that meta about the publication. You could do the same thing when you start looking through the clinical trials or grants as well. Let's start going through some of these queries here. You can do you can look for a specific word in full text or just in the abstracts, and it will bring back publications on that as well. You can sit there and, as we continue to go through, do a simple author search. Start looking through here. One interesting thing that it does give you back good error messages. If you screw it up, you type DOIs instead of DOI, it will come back and it'll tell you that that's not present. But then it gives you a list of the things that are. So it sort of helps you along, especially in your development process, to get your queries correct. Do want to show you, let's see here on my list. One other thing it does, and this goes back to the grid. If you have your grid ID, and once you pull up a institution in Dimensions, it's always in the URL, or you can go to the grid website, type in the name of the institution, and get that ID back. You can start using that grid ID to look for publications for very specific institutions and for and funders. Also, it will start, and this is part of the language, bringing back graphs. So you can start looking at this and bring it back in a programmatic fashion where you get the graph, and then you can take that and display it in whatever tool or site that you need to. Looking at, it'll bring you back pre-formatted tables. So it can bring you back in the very raw information, or it can bring you back in this table structure, and you can keep expanding upon this. So up here, I was only getting this information, and down here, I added a little bit more criteria, and now I have this particular one right here. Let's see. Then start looking at, this is the network for publications. So what this one does is interesting because for the people who are familiar with GraphML and want to build out these large graphs, it will bring you back and save information in the GraphML format. So in this case here, this was a very large network of publications. So it started out looking at the top here just for nanotechnology, right? And then it started looking at all the different publications that had it, how they were linked together, and brought back a very large GraphML file here. But this has all the information you need to take that and put it in your visualization tool right out of the bat and display these graphs. So what we found was that we could do pretty much whatever we wanted through the back end to add this information to other systems that we had on campus, or to disambiguate the information. So, like for example, in our grants system, we had people over the years who had decided to enter the same funder 10 different ways, right? They'd spell it slightly different, or they'd put V in front or something, right? But it was always a little different. Well, with this, we could take this information and with GRID and this information here, because we put in the NIH ID, we'll search for that, we'll bring back those grants, we'll find out what they say the funder is versus what we say the funder is, and start fixing some of this data that has been wrong for any number of years. So it has a lot of uses beyond just the analytics. You can go back and you can fix your data as well. So there aren't, unfortunately, the humanities is still lacking, but that's an across-the-board kind of worldly problem that we have right now. So we hope that somebody will step up with a humanities database at some point, so that we can access. But what we find is that this brings us a long way from where we were, and it gives the faculty this information up front without them having to enter all this information. And possibly if we take this and start looking at it, maybe even putting it back into elements and linking some of these things together there, spur them to take care of the things that don't get automatically done. So thankfully this worked out well, the live demo, and we will move on to our current status. Bring this back up. So we have completed our rollout of elements to everybody on campus. We did actually train all of the faculty, or they did get invites. If they didn't show up, we still count them as there because we did invite them. We did allow them to send delegates. So we went through that process of here's what a delegate is. A lot of admins showed up, communications people showed up. All of that is very helpful. Our Scholars at UAB site is now live, and we are continuing enhancements there. The Vivo Bootstrap template that I created is open source and is part of the Vivo community. And we're continuing to work on additional dimensions integrations throughout UAB, and looking at ways to market it to the faculty to get them excited about actually seeing a lot of this information that I know they wanted, but they've always said they're too busy to work it out. So thank you very much.